Brilliant, let's start this off. A huge welcome to everyone listening or watching our Take Drugs Seriously event. My name's Jane Slater. I am the Deputy Chief Executive of Transform Drug Policy Foundation and the campaign manager of Anyone's Child, Families for Safer Drug Control. I am so delighted to be here and joined by such an esteemed panel. We are here today because tomorrow, the 26th of June, is the United Nations International Day Against Drug Abuse and Illicit Trafficking. Historically, this date has been used by governments to showcase their drug control efforts and achievements in coercive terms. Large drug busts are celebrated by law enforcement. Some countries even execute drug traffickers ceremonially, all following the mantra that we will achieve a drug-free world. We are delighted to be part of Support Don't Punish's Day of Action, a day aimed at reclaiming this day and turning it about drug policy reform. At Transform and Anyone's Child, we recognise that there will never be such a thing as a drug-free world. Let's face it, we haven't even managed it under lockdown. Every year, the UN produces its World Drug Report. It was released today. The key findings from it? Well, this year marks another year of drug use rising, manufacture of drugs rising, and the report even acknowledges for the first time that the harms of our current drug policy are being felt most by the most vulnerable and marginalised in our society. We now need to face these facts and acknowledge that drug use will always exist. It has for millennia, and that rather than trying to eradicate it, we need to find ways to make the drug market safer. We recognise that by prohibiting drugs, we have created an enormous, hugely profitable and destabilising illicit market. And the harms of this market are even greater than the harms of the drugs themselves. Prohibition has never worked. It isn't working, and it's never going to work. We've got to change our approach. We need drug use to be treated as the health problem that it is, not the criminal justice one. And fundamentally, we need to get the market under control. We need doctors, pharmacists, and licensed retailers in control of the market, not organised criminals. Every year, we normally head to Parliament tomorrow for our mass lobby. Activists from around the countries will go and meet with their MPs and encourage them to speak out on this important issue. And we're watching this approach work. Every year we're witnessing more and more MPs from across the political spectrum speaking out about on this once taboo subject. Slowly, the narrative is starting to change. Sadly, we can't head to Parliament this year, but we are keen that this debate continues, and we need to keep the pressure on our MPs. And that is what this webinar is all about. I have one key request of everybody listening. I want you to listen to our panellists tonight. And if you agree that our drug laws must change, you must write to your MP and tell them this fact. We have a template letter available on the Anyone's Child website. Use it, adapt it, make it fit your narrative, and please send it off. I urge you. But I want to start by introducing our panellists, and then we'll have a question and answer session. Please keep sending your questions in. On the bottom of your panel, there's a question and answer bit. Please send your questions and we will get to them at the end of the session after we hear from our speakers. So I'm going to start by introducing the amazing Anne-Marie Cockburn. I've now known Anne-Marie for quite some time, Martha's mum. She is one of the incredible founding members of Anyone's Child. She has spoken out, one of the first to speak out, and she has now encouraged and provided support to so many other families, mothers and fathers, tragically finding themselves in a similar situation. So over to you, Anne-Marie. Thank you. Let me unmute you, sorry.
Hello everyone, I am Martha's mum. Many of you will have heard my story before, but for those of you who haven't, next month will be the 7th anniversary of the day my life changed forever. That day has become the measuring point for my life now, the before and the after. It was a beautiful July Saturday morning, a day just like today. Schools were about to break up for the summer holidays. I was planning some day trips and things for us to do throughout the summer. Martha was making plans and had arranged to meet up with her friends to watch all the Pixar films together. But on that morning, Martha cycled from our home to the other side of Oxford to go kayaking. Never in my wildest nightmares could I have imagined what was about to unfold. I got the call, the one that no parent wants to get. I got it. The voice said, "Your daughter is gravely ill and we're trying to save her life." Can you imagine that? I will never forget those words. They are etched to my very core. After kayaking, Martha swallowed half a gram of white powder that turned out to be 91% pure ecstasy. She died 3 hours later. Teenage dabbling gone horribly wrong. Her beautiful life wiped out so easily. I watched her slip away, and my days as an active mother were no longer. This isn't a TV drama or a box set on Netflix. My girl became the headline. My only child died aged 15 from an accidental ecstasy overdose. Those words make me shudder as I say them, knowing they're true is so hard to accept. I'm now going to share my screen and show you a photograph of Martha. If I can remember how to do it. Maybe not. I'll put a picture up later. I've forgotten how to do it. One minute I was planning our summer holiday. The next my life became blank. It was as though somebody had pressed the reset button. But the world carried on and the sun didn't fall out of the sky. In time, I started to piece my life back together again and had to find strength from nowhere to start the journey of my life without my girl. Martha was my future. She had so much potential waiting to unfold, and her life contained many of my own hopes and dreams. The love we have for our children is like nothing else. That bond, how protective you feel, and how much you want them to be happy and have a fulfilling life. That bond is still there, despite the fact that she's not. Grief is a cruel but powerful motivator. Since losing Martha, I have reluctantly been propelled into the world of drug policy campaigning. A frustrating world where the political disregard for scientific evidence is astounding. We've all witnessed that recently during the COVID crisis, when the government chooses to ignore expert advice that we know directly impacts all our futures. So why am I campaigning for the legal control and regulation of all drugs? Well, the current drug laws have been in place for 50 years and they don't work. Every year, more and more people die due to the inadequacies of the current laws. No substance is made safer by leaving it unregulated on the black market. We know that. Modern society needs the drug laws to be brought up to date and use the science and expert evidence available to us to form new policies. Policies that keep the young and the vulnerable safe, and laws that reduce the harm to members of our society. County lines and knife crime are caused by these modern day Al Capone style turf wars, all due to prohibition. Prohibition has never worked. All it does is create a very lucrative black market. There's no quality control, no health-based approach, no regulatory framework, no concern for your well-being or your life. And that is why I want drugs to be legally controlled and regulated. No responsible parent wants to think of their child taking drugs, but had Martha taken ecstasy that was obtained from a regulated source that included a list of ingredients and recommended dosage, she would not have taken enough for 5 to 10 people in one go. After all, the difference between poison and medicine is dose. Legal control and regulation isn't about a free-for-all, and it certainly isn't about causing more harm. It's about responding to what's needed. The government's aim is to reduce the number of people taking drugs, but you only need to look at how rife drugs are in our prisons to see how much of a failure that is. I believe that a successful drug policy should be measured by a reduction in the number of drug-related deaths, rather than by counting the number of users. The good news is that we've all seen a change over the past few years, as more and more MPs from across all parties have been willing to openly discuss this subject, and ensure it's kept on the agenda, as they too recognise how vital it is that we sort this out. As I think of my girl and of all the other families who are also suffering, I feel very proud to be part of the Anyone's Child campaign. Together we are resolute. Together we are determined to do what we can to help keep this important conversation for change going, and to collectively represent our loved ones who can no longer speak for themselves. I've discovered that I'm very good at annoying people and in making MPs squirm, and I will continue to do that until change happens. So on behalf of my precious Martha, and in order to protect your loved ones, I ask you all to contact your MPs to ensure that they are actively playing their part in helping to place this problem firmly into our history books. Thank you. Shall I try and share my screen, Jane, and show Martha?
Yeah, please do.
Let me see.
Can you see that?
I don't know how to do it.
You'll be in that bar at the bottom.
Don't worry, I can't do it. I'll do it later.
Cool. We'll bring her into the Q&A.
Andy's just running through to help. I've forgotten how to screen share. Sorry guys, I'm holding things up. Do you want to do it?
The tech support.
Oh yeah, there it is. Yeah. That's my girl. So that gives you some context as to why I do this and why I want change, and yeah, what the loss of her has done to my life. So thank you.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. No, it's always very, very difficult to speak after such powerful words, but it's important that these stories are heard. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand on to our second speaker for tonight, Sonny Dadley. Sonny is a man with multiple hats. He currently works as a social impact consultant and a motivational speaker. He's now been involved with Anyone's Child for a couple of years. He leads our West Midlands group of Anyone's Child, and if you're based in the area and want to get involved, here's the man to contact, so please let us know. I will hand over to you now, Sonny.
Cool.
Thank you.
Yeah. So first of all, I just want to say a massive thank you to Anne-Marie. You're an absolute inspiration and amazing, so it's a privilege to hear you speak. I'm just going to talk a little bit about my experience with drugs, drug policy, and without going into a whole depth of detail, I became entangled in the world of addiction, which lasted for almost 10 years. So was I a criminal at the time that I was using drugs? Absolutely not. Did society deem me as being a criminal? Yes. Were my family influenced by the years and years of draconian drug policy? Absolutely. But you know, when I think back to those times where I was literally scrambling to find money to be able to feed this habit, the police were I would say an unnecessary nuisance rather than a deterrent. And you know, if you ask many people, you know, who are active in their drug use, you know, just having, you know, the strong arm of the law looking over you doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to change anything about your lifestyle or your lifestyle choices. I went on to develop a peer-led organisation, and the learning there was quite stark. So, you know, when I was on the streets doing what I was doing, I would just know this person as being the person that, you know, is sleeping rough, or this person is doing something else. But when I kind of had an opportunity to consult with and speak to people who were, you know, going through similar experiences to myself, I realised that it wasn't the drugs that was a problem, but the fact that there were deep-rooted societal issues that disproportionately affected 99% of the people that I was coming into contact with. But for some reason, the system around us didn't recognise that. I recall one particular individual. He'd been to prison, I think something like 12 or 13 times, and this guy was in his mid-30s, and I sat down with him, and I don't know if it's because of our connected shared experiences around addiction, but we had a real heart-to-heart, and he was saying, look, I live in an absolute shithole. You know, the police are constantly on my back. He was classed as a PPO, which is a prolific and other priority offender. So he was committing a lot of kind of acquisitive crime, stealing cheese and meat and things like that. But, you know, during this time that I spent with him, you know, he opened up to me and said, you know, my life's been a mess. You know, I've been in the care system, and, you know, from a young age, I've been involved in the criminal justice system, but nobody treats me like a human being. So, you know, as we continue that conversation, you know, he started talking about his dreams, his aspirations, the things that he really wanted to achieve with his life, but didn't think that he ever would achieve because of the pressure that was on him in terms of adhering to certain ways of living and being. But anyway, I managed to convince him to consider going on a work trial, a work placement for a couple of weeks that was set up for people who had never worked before. And, you know, he came around to that idea. I said, you know, we'll look into your housing conditions, you know, we'll get environmental health involved, because if what we're describing is the situation that you're living in, you know, you wouldn't want an animal to live in those circumstances and situations. So we agreed to that. What he didn't tell me is that there was an actual active warrant out for his arrest. So, you know, I spent 2 hours with him, had a wonderful conversation. He was going to come back in the morning, and we were going to get him, you know, get the wheels in motion in terms of getting his life moving forwards. I remember he left, and I went outside to smoke a cigarette, and I looked to my right, and lo and behold, he was arrested 20 yards from my building, which will have been his 13th or whatever it was prison sentence. And unfortunately, people just get lost in the system like that. So, you know, what I want to say is that prison is no place for a non-violent drug offender. You know, there's systems around us that should be able to help and support people. I heard, you know, many years ago that there was some innovation taking place in the youth justice system whereby, you know, the background of a young person would be, you know, looked at, taken into account, and then a judgment would be made as a result of that. And I immediately thought, well, shouldn't that happen anyway? Shouldn't we be looking at the context behind how people, you know, the experiences that they've had in life? So I think, you know, as society, I think we've got a long way to go to be able to not just, you know, do something proactive in terms of drug policy, but just more broadly in terms of how we support people that are affected by, you know, poverty, deprivation. You know, and I'm briefly going to talk about the Black Lives Matter because it's an absolute the right time to do so. But, you know, there are many wrongs in history that have existed within our society to people of colour, to people from the black community, and drug policy is another one of those examples whereby it was born and initiated in an environment that was not conducive of the well-being of society. It was racist then and it's racist now. So what I would like to see happen is to see how we can start actually mobilising society rather than keeping certain pockets of society entrenched within certain ways of living, which often goes on generation after generation after generation. And what drug policy does to communities that are struggling, it compounds their misery. And it's, you know, it's a long time in coming, but an absolutely proactive way of doing something about it is to actually see what we're doing for those that are most vulnerable within our midst. I mentioned about Black Lives Matter, and I'm not going to go into all of the detail around, you know, how drug policy was formed back in, you know, the late 1800s. But, you know, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that it was targeting certain communities, and certain substances were associated with them. I think if we're actually going to, you know, really do something about creating much more equity within society, and, you know, put our you know, best foot forward in terms of doing something to tackle this horrendous history that we've got, then drug policy is absolutely a step in the right direction, and will help to kind of tangibly make the difference, particularly to people from the Black, Asian minority ethnic communities, but will show much more broadly that we're serious about actually doing something that's for the benefits of the whole of society. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sunny. God, we've got a real powerful panel here tonight. If you're not convinced by this, then don't know what's going to convince you. But next, I'd like to hand over to Crystal. Having to thank you to Sunny there. Crystal is a QC and criminal barrister, a writer, broadcaster, and legal commentator. We have many people with many hats here. He stars, you've probably seen him on the BBC TV show Crime, Are We Tough Enough? And he has a book that is due to be published in the next couple of weeks called Justice on Trial, in which I believe he looks at how we can create a new vision for crime and punishment fit for the 21st century. So I will hand over now to Chris. Thank you very much. Let me unmute you.
Thanks very much, Jane. Yes, as Jane says, my sort of main job, I've got a few, but my main job is as a criminal defence lawyer, and I've been a criminal barrister for over 25 years. And the message that I have is that almost every day of my working life has been a complete waste of time. I started off defending street sex workers, low-level drug traffickers, burglars, the kind of people that are, you know, viewed by society often with sort of disrespect and disdain. And frankly, the only reason why I did any of that work was because of the prohibition of drugs. So majority of the sex workers I represented, who were in and out of magistrates' court, being fined, going back onto the streets, finding the money to pay their fines, finding the money to pay for heroin and crack, you know, and pay dealers and pimps and all the rest of it. All of it because of the prohibition of drugs, and lives destroyed, women with just, you know, the most horrible health conditions, psychiatric and psychological problems, lives made infinitely worse by drugs. And yeah, I did my best to help them with their legal issues, but what was the point of it? Burglars, many of them, if not most of them, addicted to either heroin or crack or both. And you know, they didn't want to commit burglaries. They didn't want to be breaking into people's houses and ruining life after life after life, night after night after night. But how could they get 100, 200, 300 pounds a day for street heroin and street drugs any other way? They couldn't. And so once again, I'm defending people, waste of time, complete waste of their life, complete waste of my life, and just a source of utter human misery. And then my career progressed, and you know, in recent years I defended actually one of the very largest ever drugs conspiracy cases, 550 million pounds worth of cocaine imported by the conspiracy, disrupted, half a dozen people jailed for 20, 25, 28, 30 years. Did any fewer people take drugs? Did it make any difference to anything? It's just hundreds of years spent locked up in prison for an absolutely pointless waste of everybody's time, vast amounts of money. You think about the millions it costs to lock them up, when you could be spending those millions kind of on drug rehab programs, on drug engagement, on youth work, on charity work, all the kind of things that actually achieve something in terms of habits and trying to sort of enhance lives and enhance communities where drug use is particularly prevalent and where drug violence, of course, is got out of control. Why? Not because drugs themselves kill anyone, but because if you make it prohibited, you create huge profits for gangsters, and gangsters are going to kill each other trying to get, you know, one street or another street as part of their territory. So all of these things, I've done drug murders. I did a murder case, and I talk about this in my book. I did a murder case where a guy who was a heroin addict, had been a heroin addict for all of his life. Basically, he was in his mid-40s and he'd been addicted to heroin for almost 30 years. And he was battered to death because he stole 250 pounds from a drug dealer, and he was mining some drugs and some money for someone, and he took 250 pounds and he was beaten to death. And he was so desperate that he took that risk, and that's what happened to him. So I spent all those years, and interestingly, I was doing my recording the audio book of my book last week, and I was reading the chapter about drugs, and there's a whole chapter called "Why We Should Legalise Drugs" in the book. And Anne-Marie's story and Martha's story features in that. Anne-Marie was very kind to share her story. I know she's keen for people to hear it, so hopefully it doesn't happen to any more people. Sadly, I'm afraid it's going to, because at the moment policy isn't changing, which is why it's so important that all of you who are watching, listening to this, you do something. Yeah, you've got a voice. Yeah, we've all got a voice. Some of us have got big platforms on social media. Some of us have got small platforms on social media, but use them. Write to your MPs. Absolutely write to your MPs. Go and see them. Book an appointment to see your MP and say, I am so concerned about this. I want you to know that this is the sort of passion that I have, and I want you to change the law. And they will start to listen. But absolutely, some of the questions that I've been answering on here already, use social media, make the argument, be polite to people, be calm in the debate, but give them the facts. And the facts are that young women like Martha die because of prohibition. No other reason. Anne-Marie's convinced of it, I'm convinced of it, that Martha would still be alive if it wasn't for prohibition, because she wouldn't have been able to get 91% pure MDMA in a licensed and legalized market. That's a fact. But just sort of bringing it back, as it were, to the point, a year or so ago, I wrote an article for The Spectator about why we should legalize drugs, and why someone like me, who's on one level an establishment figure, you could argue, spent all these years going in and out of court, defending cases and kind of working in the system, and just think, what a waste of my life, what a waste of time. I enjoy my job, I get a lot from it, and it's, it's an important job, but it's soul destroying to know that the whole criminal justice system, 3/4 of it, just doesn't need to be there at all. We're just wasting our time. So as a result of all of that, I decided I'm going to go on a journey, and I traveled all over the world in the past 12 months. I've been to the States, I've been to Switzerland, and I've been to all sorts of countries that have completely different views of drugs. And one of the best arguments I ever heard for the legalization of drugs was when I was in Alabama last year on a research trip for the book. And I spoke to an elected appeal court judge, and I talk about this interview. He wouldn't be named, and you'll understand why in a minute. I said to him, why do you keep on locking young people, often black men, why do you lock them up for the rest of their lives because they've sold an ounce of weed? And he said, it's just ridiculous, it's stupid. I said, well, why do you do it? And he said, because I need to get elected. And no, I won't get elected if I advocate the reduction of sentences or legalization of drugs. So that's telling you something. He knows it's wrong, and I think most politicians know it's wrong, but the difference is they think that no one's going to vote for them if they say the truth, which is that prohibition doesn't work. Worse than doesn't work, kills people, destroys communities, destroys lives, day after day after day. It's only when politicians are embarrassed into realizing that if they don't change policy and law, they'll lose votes. And that's where all of you come in. Those of you who are listening, those of you who are advocating or out there making the arguments, get politicians to believe and understand that there is a groundswell of opinion against this lunacy of the legalization of drugs. The prohibition of drugs. That's what you need to do. So just one more thing that I'm going to share with you, and it's one extract from the book, which for me, it makes the whole moral argument, the one that goes back to the US in the early 20th century about how terrible drugs are and they interfere with, and how we should stop it all. And so I'm going to share with you just a short extract, which just show you how crackers the idea, as Jane said at the beginning, that you're going to stop drug use is. So this is just one page of my book, and I'll read a little bit for you. I hope you can see that on the screen here. So this extract, this is a sneak preview because nobody's seen this except the publishers. The earliest date for which I could find a credible reference to drug use by hominids was around 200 million years ago, from which period archaeological remains are said to provide evidence of the ingestion of psychoactive plants. Paleogenetic research suggests that the evolution in early humans of a capacity to metabolize ethanol, which is in alcohol, around 10 million years ago. So we're going back 200 million years that our species or the early predecessors or ancestors of the human species have been taking some form of psychoactive substance through the entire human evolution of the last 200 million years. And these idiots are saying to us, we're going to stop it now. 200 million years later, we've got 7.5, 8 billion people on the planet, and suddenly, after all this time, it's going to stop. It's never going to stop. What's going to stop, if we can change the law, is we're going to stop killing people unnecessarily and locking people up unnecessarily for their lives, and that's what we need to do. So I know I've got a bit aerated because I feel strongly about this, but if you don't want me to waste the next 20 years of my career on nonsense, then let's get the law changed. That's all I've got to say.
Well, thank you very much, Chris. Very, very powerfully put. Yeah, as I say, I challenge people to oppose us at the end of this panel. But I would like to now move on to the brilliant Johann. He needs really no introduction. He has supported Transform Drug Policy Foundation for forever. And his book, Chasing the Scream, and his TEDx talk on addiction have really brought so many families to the Anyone's Child campaign. Lots of people who found themselves in the worst possible situation, but have wanted to inform themselves on the issue of drugs. And I know many families have spoken to me about how useful your book was in helping them in that moment of the journey. So I'll hand over to you, Johann. Thank you very much.
Cheers, Jane. Thanks very much. I should just warn about two things. One is I'm in the hottest room in the world, and I have this air conditioner that's like super loud, so I've turned it off. And I also have hay fever, so if I'm sweating and start rubbing my nose, you have to be very careful when you're advocating for legalizing drugs. If you start rubbing your nose, which I do when I've got hay fever, to explain why. I've just been thinking about what Anne-Marie and Sunny and Chris were saying, how moving it was, and there are so many moments, I think, on this subject when you feel the weight of the grief of the unnecessary deaths and pain that the drug war is causing every day. And I wanted to just say about Anne-Marie in particular, you know, I've been to lots of places in the research for Chasing the Scream, and then obviously talking about the book. And in so many places, Anne-Marie, your story has resonated with people. The amazing work that you've built around the loss of your daughter Martha, and what you've done with that loss. Obviously nothing can ever compensate for the horrific agony of what you've been through, but to build this extraordinary positive legacy for your daughter, I think is something you should be so proud of. And I think from, you know, off the top of my head, from New Zealand to Johannesburg to Mexico City, people talked to me about your story and how it had helped them. So you should be so proud of what you're doing. And I thought what Sunny and Chris said was really amazing as well. I'm going to order Chris's book when we get off this call. I thought what I would talk, and it's very related to that thing that I've been thinking about, what I would talk about is the evidence about why this is so unnecessary. So a lot of people will hear the kind of things that we've all been saying, right? And they'll think, well, this is a tragedy, but drugs, addiction, drug use, this is just a tragic subject, right? And I think, you know, and there's just terrible tragedies caused because people use drugs, and tragedies caused because people become addicted, and that's just a sad thing about life. And I think, and other people have said this so much better than I can, but one of the things that I really want to explain is that that's not the case. That actually you could have all the drug use we currently have and all the addiction we currently have, and far fewer deaths and far more people having good lives. And the reason I know that is because I went to the places that moved beyond the war on drugs. And I just thought I'd talk about two of them. And they both started their change process in the year 2000. So in the year 2000, Portugal had one of the worst drug problems in the world. 1% of the population was addicted to heroin, which is extraordinary. And every year they tried essentially the American way more. They arrested more people, they chased them around, they put them on trial, they imprisoned them. And every year the problem got worse. Until finally one day, the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition decided to do something really radical, something nobody had done in the 70 years since the global drug war began. They said, should we ask some scientists what the best thing to do would be? So they set up a panel of scientists and doctors led by an amazing man I got to know named Dr. João Goulart, who some of you guys know as well. And they said to this panel, you guys go away, look at all the best evidence, take as much time as you need, go anywhere you have to go, and you come back and tell us what will genuinely solve this problem. And we've agreed in advance, we'll do whatever you recommend. So the idea was to just take it out of politics. So the panel went away, they looked at loads of different things, and they came back and they said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to decriminalize all drugs, from cannabis to crack, the whole lot. But, and this is the crucial next step, we're going to take all the money we currently spend on screwing people's lives up, shaming them, arresting them, imprisoning them, punishing them, all the things that Chris was brilliantly exposing. And we're going to take all that money instead, and we're going to spend it on turning people's lives around. And interestingly, it wasn't really what we think of as drug treatment in Britain, right? So, and in most of the kind of Anglo-American world. So they do some residential rehab, and that has some value. But actually the biggest thing they did was something in some ways much simpler. They set up a big program of reconnection for people with addiction problems. So say you used to be a mechanic, they go to a garage and they'll say, if you employ this guy for a year, we'll pay half his wages. They set up a really big program of small loans for people with addiction problems so they could set up and run businesses about things they cared about. The goal was to say to everyone with an addiction problem in Portugal, we love you, we value you, we're on your side, we want you back, right? Exact opposite of the message that the people that Sunny was brilliantly talking about are getting, right? The message that says you're nothing, you're worthless, you're a criminal. It was a big program of reconnection. And by the time I went to Portugal, the results were in. The best study of this is by the British Journal of Criminology. And the results it found were really unequivocal. Injecting drug use was down by 50%. Addiction was massively down. Overdose deaths were massively down. HIV transmission was massively down. Street crime was massively down. Portugal went from being almost the top of the European league table for most of these problems to the very bottom, right? In less than 15 years. And one of the ways you know it works so well is that almost nobody in Portugal wants to go back. I went and interviewed a man called João Figueira. I'm sorry to anyone who speaks Portuguese. I cannot say these names, but anyway, that's how I say it. João Figueira, who was the top drug cop in Portugal at the time of the decriminalisation. And at the time he said, what lots of people, understandably, given what they've been told all their lives, say, which is, surely if we decriminalise all drugs, we're going to have an explosion in drug use and children using drugs. It's going to be a nightmare. And João said to me, everything I said would happen didn't happen. And everything the other side said would happen did. And he talked about how he felt really ashamed that he'd spent so many years harassing people, punishing people, making their addiction worse, when he could have been helping them turn their lives around. So that's one model, that's decriminalisation, that deals with some of the problems. So decriminalisation is worth defining it. Decriminalisation is where you stop punishing drug users, but they still have to go to criminal gangs to get their drugs. And that still leaves a lot of problems. It's a huge step forward, obviously, but that still leaves a lot of problems because there's still a prohibited market, right? Which has all the problems that Anne-Marie talked about and that Transform and Jane and everyone there do so much work to expose. So I want to look at what are models of legalisation. Now, I don't think you need me to talk about cannabis legalization. I've seen that in Canada and Uruguay and Colorado and other places, but I think that's fairly well known. Let's talk about, because very often people go, well, okay, you can sort of see that for cannabis, but what about, let's say, heroin, right? And we had addiction in my family, so it's very close to my heart. So I went to a country that legalized heroin. So in the year 2000, at the same time Portugal was having this crisis, Switzerland was having a really bad crisis. My dad's actually from Switzerland. It's why I've got this weird name. So I know it quite well, even from them. So people might remember on the news at the time, you know, these images, like dystopian images of parks in Switzerland where people were like openly injecting in the neck in public, and really disturbing, chaotic scenes of really distressed and unwell people. And that would be bad for any country, but Swiss people are obsessed with order, right? It's not a coincidence they invented clocks. So like for them, this is like the worst possible nightmare. And again, Swiss people are really right-wing, right? My Swiss relatives make Donald Trump look like Jeremy Corbyn, right? And the instincts of the people in Switzerland were very much authoritarian crackdown. So they were doing that for years, you know, punishing people more and more. And then we got a picture there. This is one of the famous images from what's it called? Not Görlitz, a park. Anyway, one of the parks in Zurich. And it kept going on and kept going on. And then Switzerland got its first ever female president, a complete hero of mine, a woman I got to know named Ruth Dreyfus. I know Jane loves her as well. Everyone loves Ruth. She's my candidate for president of the world. And Ruth explained to the Swiss people, when you hear the word legalization, what you picture is anarchy and chaos. But she said, what we have now is anarchy and chaos. We have unknown criminals selling unknown chemicals to unknown drug users, all in the dark, all filled with violence, disease, and chaos. Legalization, she said, is the way we're going to restore order to this chaos. So it's important to understand. And then she introduced this policy, as she would say, and she always stresses, very much backed by civil society, from local prostitutes to doctors, a whole big civil society coalition that was also fighting for change. And it's important to understand what legalizing heroin doesn't mean, right? So no one, I mean, maybe there's some very hardcore libertarians, but virtually nobody thinks there should be like a heroin aisle in Boots, right? That's not the plan, right? So the way it works is you can't just go and openly buy it. The way it works is, if you've got a heroin problem, you're offered a range of possible ways you can be helped, but one of them is you can be assigned to a heroin prescribing clinic. So I spent time in the one in Geneva. And so the way it works is you turn up, you have to go at 7 o'clock in the morning because Swiss people believe in doing things insanely early. This is a constant source of disagreement between me and my dad. And you turn up, you go in, and you're given your heroin there. It's medically pure heroin, not the contaminated shit you get from criminals. And you can't take it out with you, partly because they don't want you to sell it on, but mostly because they want to monitor you to make sure you're okay. So you shoot up there, or they'll help you. And then you leave and you go to your job because you're given loads of help to get housing, to get work, to get therapy. And there was loads of things that were really striking to me about the Swiss clinics. The first was that program has now been in place for 15 years. Does anyone, I'll just say anyone watching, try to guess how many people have died of heroin overdoses on legal heroin in Switzerland since this began? Chris is indicating exactly the right number. 0, not a single person. Significantly more people have died of heroin overdoses in the United States, by contrast, since we started having this conversation, right? No one has died in the legal program. In the illegal program, a small illegal market does persist, but it's fallen every single year, and overdose deaths have massively fallen, because who wants to spend loads of money buying shitty contaminated street heroin when you can get it for free from the government and they'll actually help you as well? But there were a few things that really surprised me about this program, and I realized that in some ways that I was quite naive. So one of them was, if you're assigned to this program, they'll give you your heroin for as long as you want. They'll give you any dose you want except for one that would kill you, and there is never any pressure to cut back. And when I learned that, I thought, well, surely everyone just stays on it forever then, because we're told, oh, the drug takes you over, enslaves you, you need more and more of it. And Rita Mangi, who's the psychiatrist who runs the clinic, looked at me like I was stupid, and she explained, there's almost no, when I went there, this is a few years ago now, there was like, I think there were 2 people who were still on the program who'd been there at the start. So almost everyone does cut back and stop using heroin on this program. And I was like, well, how can that be? And she said to me, like it was kind of obvious, well, we help them. And as their lives get better, they don't want to be anesthetized so much, which is kind of obvious, right? Addiction is not primarily, as Sunny was getting at, addiction is not primarily about the drug. Addiction is primarily about the pain, your underlying pain. The opposite of addiction is connection, right? If you're in deep pain, if you want to understand why people seek out painkillers, you've got to understand why they're in pain. And you've got to deal with that underlying pain. And one of the things I think is, just to kind of wrap up on this, like one of the things that's so important to know about Switzerland and should really give us hope is, like I say, Switzerland's a really right-wing place, right? And yet Swiss people, after this program had been in place for a couple of years, had a referendum on this. They have referendums on everything in Switzerland, right? You can trigger one very easily. And, you know, people thought, oh, it's going to be overturned. They had a campaign. I really recommend people look up, by the way, there's a very good, obviously I write about it in the book, but there's a very good for free, JOHANN CSETE did a very good report on how they won that campaign. It's just called From the Mountaintops. If you Google From the Mountaintops Switzerland drugs, it'll come up. Yeah, that'll come up. If you can't, email me. Can't find it that way. And 70% of Swiss people voted to keep heroin legal. Not because they're so compassionate, right? I'd love to tell you that's not why, right? They're not so compassionate. It's because it led to such a fall in crime, right? For everyone. Street prostitution, as Chris was getting at, literally ended. Massive fall in muggings, car theft, and it's much cheaper to help people than harass them and imprison them. So Swiss parks stopped being full of the kind of images that we saw, and there's been a massive fall in addiction. And the best research on this is by a guy called Dr. Ambrose Uchtenhagen, who's done great work on that. And I think so. I think what that establishes is two things that are really important. Firstly, there are alternatives that work extremely well. They're not perfect. They still have problems in Portugal and Switzerland, of course. But everywhere I went where they moved beyond the drug war, from Vancouver to Uruguay to Switzerland to Portugal, you saw the same pattern. When it's initially proposed, it's seen as radical, mad, wacky, insane. And then people fight for it, it happens, and very rapidly it ceases to be controversial because the improvement is so significant. And so it's achievable in policy terms, it's achievable politically if they can do it in Switzerland, my God, they can do it anywhere. But also, it goes back to, I think, something that Chris was getting at really well as well. So with imagine you're a politician, I know it's a horrible thought, but imagine it for a second. Imagine you're a politician, right? You are if you're a rational politician, you're constantly making a calculation. If I do X, how much praise will I get and how much shit will I get, right? And at the moment, if you do the right thing on drug policy, the kind of thing that would have saved Martha's life, that would have saved the lives of Sonny's friends, that would have saved the lives of Chris's clients, you'll get some praise and you'll get a lot of shit, right? But that calculus, which politicians make at the moment, can absolutely be changed, and it can be changed by us. And one of the ways I know that is I'm gay, right? And when I was a kid realizing I was gay when I was like 9 or 10, that calculus was completely, there was a tiny benefit for standing up for the equality of gay people and a shit ton of shit, if that's not too many shits in one sentence. You know, I remember when, you know, the first gay kiss in EastEnders, right? When I must have been, I don't know, 8. And the front page of The Sun the next day said it's EastBenders, right? Now, if the craziest UKIP councillor tweeted that, they'd have to resign, right? What happened? The calculus changed not because politicians changed their minds spontaneously and decided to be nice people, although some of them were brave, and actually people across the political spectrum were good, from Tony Benn to Edwina Currie, actually, I wouldn't normally agree with, but was very good on gay issues. Some of them were brave, but what happened more was that ordinary people demanded change and made our country better. They persuaded their fellow citizens, they appealed to people in a spirit of love and compassion. We did it on gay rights, we did it on women's rights, we've done it on so many things. We can be better, right? But it will only happen if all of you sign up to support Anyone's Child, sign up to support Transform, and build a big sustained movement, and we don't give up. And every day the drug war goes on, more people like Martha die, more people like Sonny's friends die, more people like Chris's clients die. And every person who joins the fight brings the day when we end that war closer and we save huge numbers of people's lives. So I'm really proud to stand with Transform, with Anyone's Child, and I urge all of you to do the same. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Johann. As always, you are very eloquent at speaking about this, and I can't help feeling that we should be bringing many people along with us. Just a huge thank you to all of our panelists. I'm looking through the various questions that have come in. There are obviously far more questions than we can answer in the 10 minutes we have remaining. But what is clear from them that there is a lot of support for what the panelists are saying. We clearly have a lot of people listening who have been directly impacted. And we even seem to have a few MPs, so that is reassuring. We will try and respond to all of your questions on text, but I thought I would try and sort of roll a whole load of your questions into one and ask it to all of the panelists if that works. And basically there is a recurring theme in the comments of, look, we've said, write your MP. What other ways can people mobilise and get involved? How do we actually bring the general public on board? And how do we create this tipping point to actually change the conversation? And I just want to turn to each panelist to see what you think. I'm going to start with you, Sonny, because you are nodding away. If that's okay. I'm going to ask you to unmute. There you go.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of ways. I think between the panelists, we'll probably cover a lot of them off. I mean, I think the thing that I would really ask for is, in order to be able to influence your MP, you will need to be registered to vote. And as somebody that's worked with people from the homeless community, in and out of prison, affected by addiction, I was kind of always taken aback in terms of how disengaged they were from the democratic system around us. So I would actually, you know, get people to register to vote there and then. So what I would say is that, you know, people, you know, the more people we can have that are contacting their MPs, fantastic. But I think, you know, if we were to look at the 250,000 people that are registered with treatment services, for example, and to find out, you know, how many of them are registered to vote or not, and if they're not registered, get them to register, then there's a substantial number of people there who we could have, you know, who I'm sure would be allies for the cause.
Thank you, Zanny. Can we go to Chris?
Yeah, thanks, Jane. Well, listen, I hope Johann won't mind me interrupting him, because that image is actually in my book from Platzplitz Park in Geneva back in the day when heroin use was on the streets of Switzerland. And I went to the same clinic that you went to, Johann, in Geneva. It's now run by a young doctor called Alice Bovini. And it was just staggering to me, the difference between drug users in that clinic and the picture that I put on screen. I mean, it just remind this is what it used to look like. Oh, I think it's disappeared somewhere. Hold on a minute. Where is it? Oh, that's not it. Hold on, that's the book. Hold on. I've lost it. Anyway, I hope you all saw it. The picture of the guy, you know, just shooting up in a park in a public place. The difference now, when I went to the clinic, which was only actually about 6 months ago, 5 months ago, no, it was October, so 6 months, 7 months ago. When I went there, the drug users and the service users in the clinic are just, you know, as you said, Johann, they go to work, they're students, you know, they can live their lives. So I'm not answering the question, but I was so obviously very impressed with everything that Johann had to say, and you know, Switzerland is a really good example. So the answer to the question is this: the only way the law will change is if politicians are persuaded that enough people will support them if they advocate change. So you all have a voice, use it, not just on social media, but whenever there's a phone in about crime on the radio, ring in and make this point. Yeah, whenever, you know, whenever there's an opportunity to make a clear, compassionate and passionate argument for what's wrong, make it. And then the politicians will start to listen, because politicians, and I know some are listening to us, and so hopefully they will take on board the rational argument that we're making. But politicians respond to electoral pressure and nothing else. They won't change policy if they think it will lose them votes. So advocate to the public, change minds, persuade, speak to your own family. You know, my dad probably doesn't agree with what I say, but I still make the point to him. You know, lots of people I know that maybe have very different views, just make the argument. And then it's kind of like it's like a viral effect, and you get virality on social media, and you get virality through conversations and speaking to people. So just keep making the points and keep making the argument. And I'm sure Anne-Marie will forgive me for saying this, but tell Martha's story, because we've all got kids. I've got 4 kids. Okay, and I don't want one of my teenage kids to die because some dealer gives them something they don't know what they're taking. And just keep making that point, because that, if you're going to change minds, it's going to be to save the lives of children. And that's the most important reason why we need change, and keep making that argument.
Thank you, Chris. Can I turn to you, Anne-Marie, now?
Yeah, I mean, I started with a completely blank canvas, provoked into this, like I said earlier, propelled due to the tragedy, and I wanted to learn as much as I could about this subject. So I took a year of meeting everyone I could, politicians and scientists, and just searching for answers for me to help form my opinion. As I went on that journey of learning, I then was talking to a lot of my friends, and a lot of them just were not convinced. They just couldn't understand where I was going. But 7 years on, you know, a lot of them they understand now. We've learned together. So it's lots of conversations. It's lots of sort of working things out and working how to sort of say things in certain ways. So I've got quite a good conversion rate now. And as I said earlier, it would just be annoying, really annoy people into kind of just trying to sort of unravel some of this subject, because, and then saying, I try and say in a very ordinary way what I've learned about this information, because it's important that the message gets out there unravelled and clear, because we've had 50 years of tabloids feeding our psyches, and we need to unravel that. So yeah. And read Chasing the Scream, because I learnt a lot in that book. There you go.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Thoroughly agree. And over to Johann, sorry.
I think, you know, I was thinking as Chris was speaking, when Ruth was the president of Switzerland, she went to that clinic to visit it one day after it had been in place for a couple of years. There was a guy who was there to use heroin, and he went up to Ruth and he handed her a note, and he ran off. And she put it in her pocket. And later she went back to her office, the president's office. She opened the letter and he said, I'm not sure I should write this to you, but I was living on the streets, and I was in a really bad way with addiction, and you opened these clinics and they've helped me. And if you walk out of your office and you go in 2 doors down in the president's building, you'll see me because I work for you now. And I remember, just really stayed with me, that story of like, and Ruth, by the way, now lives opposite, the former president lives opposite that clinic, which I think tells you something. I think people are absolutely asking the right question, which is, the evidence is very clear, right? That moving away from drug war policy towards policies of legal regulation and control is obvious, right? And the logic behind it is enormous. And as Chris alluded to privately, huge numbers of politicians will admit that to you, including the most senior politicians, without giving too much away. So what do we do to get there? I think there's all sorts of things which everyone has alluded to. I think Anne-Marie's incredibly effective at doing this. There's something I think we could add to our bow. So Gandhi said, one of the challenges of making a case for change is to make the oppression visible. And I think a lot about a group of people I got to know in Vancouver who were really good at this. I won't try to tell the whole story because it'd take too long. But there's a group of homeless people who had addiction problems, led by my friend Bud Osborne, who decided one day that they were going to make it clear that these policies were killing them. And there was a mayor of Vancouver at the time named Philip Owen, a right-wing mayor at the time. And everywhere Philip Owen went, they followed him with a coffin. And the coffin had written on it, "Who will die next, Philip Owen, before you change your drug policies?" And they filled Oppenheimer Park, one of the biggest parks in Vancouver, with 3,000 crosses, because 3,000 people had died of overdoses in Vancouver. And they wrote the names of each person who died on those crosses. They just made the death toll visible. By the way, Philip Owen changed his mind, opened the first safe injection site. Deaths on the downtown east side of Vancouver fell by 80%. So I think there's a thing about, and I think the Black Lives, as Sunny was talking about, the Black Lives Matter movement has shown incredibly effectively how you can do some of this. This drug war, because sometimes it's framed as, oh, you've got the current situation, which is prohibition of the drug war, which is the kind of safe option, and then you've got the alternative, which is risky and edgy. It's exactly the opposite. What we do now is killing people every day, right? Every day. And what we've got to do is make that death toll visible and clear. And I think there's a place for just very direct activism, making that clear, showing what's happening. I'm not saying that's the whole thing. Think about the gay rights movement. You had movement for equality for gay people. You had such a range of forms of activism. You had people like Peter Tatchell, who were doing the kind of thing that I'm advocating, very direct, confrontational activism. You had people who were very much inside the machine, making the case for change. People like Roy Jenkins, making the case for change at the top tables in very polite and discreet ways. You need all of these options. We need to attack it from every angle. This is such a bad policy and harms so many people. You can come from so many different places. You can be like, our friend who wrote Good Cop, Bad War is a police officer and has done it in Neil Woods, who's done completely, and people haven't read that book, I really recommend it. Amazing work. You can be a police officer, you can be a homeless street user, you can be a concerned mum, you can be everywhere in between and care about this policy. So I think we've got to make the oppression visible. We've got to make it clear to these people that they're killing people. We've got to explain to ordinary British people, who are good, warm-hearted people in the main, that there are alternatives that will save these people's lives, and we've got to build love and compassion for the people who are currently dying. So it's a big project, but I absolutely think we can achieve it. Think about the transformations in how gay people are seen. It's really recently. We can do that.
Brilliant. Well, I hope everyone is motivated. Exactly. I really do believe this is an issue we're winning, and we are changing the conversation. I've been working in this 15 years. We never had so many MPs speaking out in favour of this. I once spoke to an MP who told me that if they receive 20 letters on any one issue, they will develop an opinion of it. 20 letters is an easy bar, right? So please, I want to really, really reiterate my point. Go to the Anyone's Child website, download the template letter and send it. Please, please feel free to adapt it. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. Write what you've heard tonight and tell your MP and get a meeting. We will assist you with those meetings. We can help provide briefings. We can talk it through. We want to make it as easy as possible because it is important. They are our democratic elected representatives and we need to be encouraging them to speak out. As our panel has alluded to, we know when we meet them, many will agree in private, but we need to give them that public reassurance that the public is with them, that polling is showing that public opinion is increasingly on side, and we need to get them to have the confidence to speak out on this. I want to say the most enormous thank you to you, the panellists. I think you will agree they are such a strong group of people, and together I'm so inspired that we are going to be the movement that changes this. I want to thank you all to listen. Thank you all for listening. Please download the template letter and please complete our evaluation form at the end of it. And thank you very much for joining. I'm very grateful. Goodbye.